I'd like to turn you to John chapter 7, the first 24 verses. John chapter 7, beginning at verse 1 through verse 24. And yes, you may wonder as you read further in the chapter why I stopped there, but there's method in my madness at least. Verse 1. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea, because the Jews sought to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand. His brothers therefore said to him, "Depart from here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For even his brothers did not believe in him. Then Jesus said to them, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I am not going yet to come up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come." When he had said these things to them, he remained in Galilee. But when his brothers had gone up, then he also went up to the feast, but not openly, but as it were in secret. Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, "Where is he?" And there was much complaining among the people concerning him. Some said, "He is good." Others said, "No, the contrary, he deceives the people." However, no one spoke openly of him for fear of the Jews. Now about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. And the Jews marveled, saying, "How does this man know letters, having never studied?" And Jesus answered them and said, "My doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone wills to do his will, he shall know concerning the doctrine whether it is from God or whether I speak on my own authority. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. Did not Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why then do you seek to kill me?" The people answered and said, "You have a demon. Who's seeking to kill you?" Jesus answered and said to them, "I did one work, and you all marveled. Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgments." That far. And I titled the sermon, "Defending a Miracle." We'll comment about that. We'll also comment about why this particular choice. You see, John appears to have picked up a train of thought that he left in chapter 5 at the pool of Bethesda. So John Calvin says about it, and other commentators as well. But this is John's pattern. He looks at the acts of the incarnation topically rather than chronologically. So he doesn't pick things up because this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. He picks things up and says, this happened, and it was part of this, which is part of this, which is part of this. That's what he's doing. What he's picked up is in chapter 5, verse 16. For this reason the Jews persecuted him and sought to kill him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." In chapter 6, verse 1, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee. That means he left Jerusalem. That was where the pool of Bethesda was. And he had been teaching in the temple then. He left there and he went up to Galilee. And then he did the miracle that we have looked at, feeding the 5,000. He went to Galilee to slip out of the sight, at least of the Judeans, because they were trying to kill him. They were trying to force what would be the crucifixion. He's got a timetable for the crucifixion, and he's going to work that timetable. He continued to proclaim his office of the Messiah, continued to proclaim his task as the Redeemer in Galilee. And the word got back to Judea, of course, but it wasn't a big deal because it was up there and not down here. But the question I want to ask, Jesus is just started now at the end of this passage to defend a miracle. Why would anybody have to defend a miracle? What on earth is going on? It was God's plan, obviously. But what he was doing was he was using that miracle on the day that it was done in order to set up a question about the Sabbath, which was the law of God, which was the most visible of the laws of God in the mind of the Jews. You were in church on Sunday. You were in synagogue on Saturday. You were at the temple for the feasts. You are righteous. That was the one everybody saw. That was the measurement that they had. And so Jesus was challenging that measurement. God was challenging it. So he used that miracle to challenge that measurement. So he's saying to the Jews, why do you think I did this? And they didn't like the answer. So let me give you my points. First, what is the law? The letter and the spirit, not just the letter. Second, the law with regard to the Sabbath. The Westminster Shorter Catechism describes it as acts of necessity, piety, and mercy in that order. And then last, I'd like to look at the law properly used. What do we do, and how do we use the law, and what do we expect it to do for us and to us? Let's begin with verse 1. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee. This is the Galilean ministry. John's picking that up again for us after having been there. He's going to pick that up. He's explaining now why he went out. He's back in Jerusalem. He's going back to that. So that's why he said, "Here I went." He did not want to walk in Judea. He had demonstrated his power and authority at the pool of Bethesda. He took a man who'd been crippled, sick for 38 years, and with one sentence healed him. Didn't even touch him. And the Jews were upset. Well, they were upset enough that he'd healed him on the Sabbath. But he told the man to pick up his bed and walk home. That was against the law. There would be another instance where Jesus would go into the synagogue on the Sabbath. And there would be a man there with a withered hand, and everybody would be looking, say, is he going to heal him? Will he heal him? Will he do that? So Jesus chastises them for that. And then he says to the man, stretch out your hand. Well, the hand is deformed. He can't stretch it out. Stretch out your hand. That's not against the law. There's no law that says you can't stretch out your hand on the Lord's Day, on the Sabbath. So he takes their law and he throws it in their face because they don't understand their law. They don't understand the law that they made as opposed to the law that God had given. So Jesus goes up to Galilee and he begins to demonstrate again his understanding of the law, God's understanding. He begins to explain to them how things are in the world, and he shows them his power, and he shows by showing his power that he is, after all, equal to God. He doesn't always use those terms. He certainly doesn't declare that he is God, but he shows all of the signs that he is, okay? And they accuse him of trying to be like God, and they will later again. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. That's in the 7th month of the year, usually in our calendar, September. The feast series began with Rosh Hashanah. That's the head of the year. Okay? That's in month 7, day 1. It continued to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, in month 7, day 10. It concluded with the Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths, called Sukkos, on the 15th day of that 7th month. This is the longest festival series in Judaism, and therefore the most visible. So it would be the one that most people would make sure they went to, even if they missed Passover, although Passover was, even in their minds, the most important. So Jesus is saying to his brothers, go. In effect, he's saying, show off. Okay? They say to him, in verse 3, depart from here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. Not the 12. Okay? He's referring to the disciples who've heard about him, who saw him and what he did at the pool of Bethesda, that they may see it and they may rejoice and they may learn from you. Those who were from Judea who had experienced the feeding of the 5,000, they would see more. They're saying, go down and, well, I'm going to put words in their mouths. Go down and show off. And what they say to him is, nobody does these miracles, okay, verse 4. Nobody does those miracles in secret when he wants to be known openly. What kind of charlatan are you? What kind of crazy are you? Here you've got allegedly all this power. You've done all these things. Go show it off. Make yourself the one everybody talks about. Make yourself the one everybody can't do without. Isn't that how it's supposed to work? Because his brothers don't believe in him. They don't understand who he is. It almost seems that what they want him to do is go down to Jerusalem to try to do these miracles, to have those miracles fail, and Jesus would be exposed as a charlatan. They couldn't believe. Well, they couldn't believe that their older brother was not their older brother. Verse 5 says, his brothers did not believe. Jesus is picking up again, and John is picking up again. A prophet is not without honor except in his own country and in his own house. They'd grown up with him. I suppose they were saying, if you could have done those miracles, why didn't you feed us better than our parents could feed us? You could have done that. Why did you short us what you've done for these other people? They didn't believe him. They didn't trust him. In verse 6, Jesus says, my time has not yet come. The commentators all say that he's not referring to the crucifixion, but to the schedule that he and the Father have planned. Not to arrive in a large parade like the first day of the feast series would be, but to arrive later. There will be a triumphal entry, and they're suggesting, and Jesus is saying, we haven't planned that yet. That's not for this. He's going to go and he's going to walk into town quietly. He's going to arrive not as a conquering hero, but as a teacher. He's going to go there after the feast has settled down. Everybody's been there for a few days and they're getting kind of used to it. Sure, it's a good time and everything's going well, but they're no longer quite as excited as they were the first week. There he would be, just another teacher. He wouldn't have come in and said, here I am. He'd just be another one of the teachers. And there would have been a large number of teachers speaking in the temple and around the town. Just another teacher, a member of the crowd, until his time comes. But he says to his brothers, your time is always ready. Your superficial Judaism must be broadcast because it has no meaning other than that. So you've got to show it off. That's not what I'm here for. In verse 7, he says, the world cannot hate you because you're part of it. It hates me because I testify. I preach to them the need of repentance, which the sinful world refuses to hear and hates to be reminded of. You go. I'm not going yet. I'm not going as you are to parade openly. And so he stayed back in Galilee, probably for the first 7, 8, 9, 10 days. Remember, it was a 15-day occurrence. And then he went up, but he didn't go openly. He kind of came in after everybody had seen all the people who had arrived, and he showed up, and I didn't notice him before. And that was what he was doing. But when the festival had started, the Jews had looked for him, verse 11. They looked for him, they wondered where he was. They know that this prophet exists. They're hoping for the grand appearance of the king, the Messiah. Just as Jesus had said about those in Galilee, however, when he said to them, "You look for me, not because you believe, but because you ate the bread." You don't want to follow me. You just want to get what you think I'm going to bring. Which to the Jew was the Messiah would come and make the Jews, Israel, the greatest nation on earth again. It would be like someone had been promising us about making America great again. That was what they were looking for. In fact, that was all they were looking for. He was a topic of discussion and debate. Some said he's marvelous. Some said he's a charlatan. He's a deceiver of the people. And they argued back and forth, but they did so quietly, because none of them wanted to be noted by the Jews as being talking about Jesus. That could mean that the Sanhedrin would be angry with them. And so they stayed away from that which was what Jesus and his Father had wanted. That he would not be broadcast, but that his words might be heard. And as he came about the middle of the feast, maybe day 8 or day 9, he went into the temple and taught. He didn't come with a huge introduction, not banners of "Here is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." People didn't recognize him. Many of them didn't recognize him because while they'd heard about him, they'd never seen him. He went to a very large audience. Probably this is the second year of his ministry, so he's not unknown. That's the commentator's view of it. And the comment that's made when he's teaching in the temple is, "How does this man know letters? He's never gone to school. He's never studied." It was his encyclopedic knowledge of the Old Testament that impressed them. How does he know all this stuff? He planned it. He wrote it. He brought it to pass. Yeah, he's quite intimately aware of it all. How does he know letters? And he says to them, "My doctrine is not my own, but his who sent me." I'd like to pause there in going through the text per se, and just say my point number 1 is the law, its letter and spirit. If I went to verse 17, "If anyone wills to do his will, he will know concerning the doctrine whether or not it is from God or whether I speak from my own authority. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. Did not Moses give you the law? And yet none of you keeps the law." There's making his challenge. Here's what he's doing. He's saying that the law of God is a reflection of God himself. Everything God does is for his glory. Everything he orders is for his glory. And everything he orders reflects what he is. So the law is letters, write it down on paper, specific ordinances, specific things, but it's not only that. Those orders, those words, they represent something. They represent God's nature and his plan for his creation. They represent his will and his nature. And I want to emphasize that. We look at the law of God and we think of the 10 Commandments. Well, I got some sad news for you. There's 600 and some odd more in the Old Testament than 10. And there's 2 more that are picked up by God in the Old Testament and by the Jews and Jesus in the New Testament. And they say, this is the core of them. You will love Yahweh your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. So that all of the commandments, I'll take the 10. Okay? The 10 commandments, first 4, first 5, they're what? This is how you treat God. This is how you think about God. This is what God is. This is what he wants you to see about himself as the creator, as the only God there is. And if he's the only God there is, then if you need help, who are you going to go to? I mean, I don't want to denigrate the medical profession in any way, or any other profession for that matter. But if you need help in somewhere, who are you going to go to? You're going to go to the best there is. The only one there is. That's what God's doing. You see, this is who I am. And then the second part of it, that second command, is everything I do to you and for every man, I want you to do. So I make the sun rise on the righteous and the unrighteous. I make the rain fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. I feed the world. I care for the world. I heal the sick. I discipline them. I deal with them. I bring glory to my name in those things. But all of the things I do are concerned, and I'm concerned for all of the creation. I build the world, and I maintain the world so that you don't suffer. I build the world so you don't suffer. You see, God said in Genesis 8:22. First, he had said in Genesis 1:31 that the creation was all very good. But in Genesis 8:22, when he's summarizing what he's done in Noah's day, God said that the creation was good. Then he cursed the creation, but he didn't destroy it or materially change it. The law is a detail of his revelation, both of the negatives and the positives. Notice the first and second great commandments. He disciplined the world, but he didn't wipe everybody out. He didn't make the world so full of terrible diseases that only half a dozen people survive at any time. He continued to feed and clothe and care for the creation so that everything proceeded along the lines they had known. Yes, there were changes in Noah's day, but summer and winter, springtime and harvest, day and night will not cease as long as the world continues. God says, I am faithful to what I created, and I want you to recognize that. I want you to be as faithful to what I created as I am to what I created. If I may apply that. The letter of the law points out instructions. Creation shows his power and his planning. By doing so, it shows his nature. It shows what he is like. And just for a moment, Leviticus 25 and verse 25. If one of your brethren, 25? Yeah. If one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possessions, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem what his brother sold. If the man has no one to redeem it, but he himself becomes able to redeem it, then let him redeem it. But he talks about the land, and he says the land will have a Sabbath. Let him count the years since the sale, and restore the remainder to the man to whom he sold it, that he may return to his possession. If he's not able to have it restored to himself, then what was sold shall remain in the hand of him who brought it until the year of Jubilee. It shall be released then. Every seventh year, you are not allowed to plow your field and plant it. You had to give the land a vacation. That's what's being referred to here. A vacation for the land? You can't work the land 24/7. You got to give the land a break. The land, the dirt needs a break. In God's creation, he says, that's the way I treat the creation. That's why it gets its rain. That's why it gets the food, the nourishment that it needs. And I want it to have the chance to do that by saying to you, you can't plow it that 7th year. You have to let it lie fallow so that what dies there can feed the ground again. And you can't make it expend some more of its strength. It's got to have a chance to build up some strength. You can, at the end of the year, harvest what has grown from what had been there, the seeds that had been on the ground that you didn't plant. That could happen. You couldn't plow it again until the 8th year. God says, you see, I care even for the dirt. I care for the rocks. If I went to Exodus 34, and, let's see, Exodus 34. This is a passage we think is really strange. Beginning at verse 26. Now the first fruits of your land you shall bring to the house of Yahweh your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Huh? You got rules for your recipes? Yes. Because God says, I'm not going to let you do things that wouldn't be happening in nature. You can't try to make nature do things that it wouldn't do itself. Yahweh said to Moses, write these words, for according to the tenor of these words I have made a covenant with you. So he was there for 40 days, 40 nights. Moses neither ate bread nor drank water, and he wrote on the tablets of stone. Not only first fruits of the land, but if I went further down in chapter 34, you would find that you would be able to say about God that you couldn't even let a donkey suffer. If you see your worst enemy's donkey lying down under his load, you can't walk by. You have to stop and you have to help your enemy, or force your enemy, to unload the donkey, stand it back up so it doesn't get hurt, and then load it again. God says, because I do that with the animals. You have to do it with the animals. You see, the letter not only has details, it has a spirit behind it. We're supposed to treat the land the way God does. We're supposed to treat it even more appropriately and more strongly than 1 year in 7. We're to treat that creation the way God does. This may make some thoughtful applications for not all modern uses are mentioned. The way we do mining today, the way we drill for oil, the way we dispose of our waste. These are applications that we need to say, God doesn't treat the land that way. We have to treat the land better than that. The dirt, the animals. Treating the animals with kindness and care. Rescuing sheep, as Jesus gives them the instruction. Which of you, having a sheep that falls in a pit on the Sabbath day, will not go and take him out of it? This is appropriate. Now, we're not like the SPCA commercials, mind you. But at the same time, we are responsible to deal with the animals and care for them, even if they're not in our field, or even if they're not in our pets. We have to make sure that we are careful. As much as I would like to run over every squirrel that I could possibly see, it isn't a good thing. It's not according to God's law. Treating people like God does, the second great commandment, with respect and care according to the letter and spirit of God's law. Treating people the same way God treats them, which talks about our prejudices, talks about our abuses, talks about our using people, whether for money or for other purposes. We're supposed to treat people the way God does. And he says, I do everything to bring glory to myself in how I treat them. So we are to use people, work with people, deal with people the same way God does. You see, the commandments were not just, you did it this. Go to Matthew 25. Inasmuch as you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me, God says. That's what I'm after you to do. I want you to serve them. I want you to care for them. I want you to deal with them. That's the spirit of the law. If I can go to point 2. Chapter 7, verse 19. The second part of verse 19. The first part was, did not Moses give you the law, yet none of you keeps the law? Why do you seek to kill me? Point 2. Specific law, the Sabbath law. That's the incident that Jesus is going to call up again about the pool of Bethesda and about their response to the pool of Bethesda. Why do you seek to kill me? And the people said, you have a demon. Who's seeking to kill you? Well, back in chapter 5, the Jews made it clear they were seeking to kill him just because he had broken the Sabbath according to their law. So what happened was that God had used Jesus' healing of that ill man on the Sabbath as a picture, as an example. He's going to use that now to take their superficial obedience and say that's not the law. All that is following a few letters. It's not following what the law's spirit was. And that's why this is here and why this passage is the way it is. Jesus is making that example for all of God's law. It was the one that was most visible to the Jews. Jesus says in verse 21, I did one work, and you marveled. But because I did it on the Sabbath, and because I told him to go home and take his bed and go home on the Sabbath, you said, you're terrible, you deserve to die. You broke the law. Okay? Then in verse 22 and 23, Jesus says to them, now, remember this, please. Back in Genesis 17, verse 12, I said, or God said, that you are supposed to circumcise a child on the 8th day. How many days are in a week? 7. That means if you circumcise a child on the 8th day of the week, or the 8th day of the child's life, since there's not an 8th day of the week, 8th day, that means you're going to be circumcising them sometimes on the Sabbath day. But you're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath day. You circumcise, Jesus says, a baby, even on the 8th day, even it's a Sabbath. That's unnecessary work, according to your understanding of the law. But you're breaking God's law. Aren't you breaking God's law in your own perspective? Isn't this hypocrisy in the worst manner? You're paying attention to one set of laws instead of all of the laws, and you're making excuses, or you're saying, well, you can interpret the law certain ways. Jesus says you cannot. When you come to an example, or when you come to an exception in the law, you need to say, what does that exception teach me? What does it teach me about the way God deals with his creation? So I picked the Westminster Shorter Catechism, question 60, about the fourth commandment. The commandment requires obedience in 3 aspects, as do all the other commandments too, by the way. First, necessity. Jesus and his disciples in Matthew 12, verses 1 to 8, are in a field. They're walking through the field and they're hungry. And they take the grain, as the scripture says you can do in somebody else's field. You can take it. You can't take it out of the field, but you can rub it out in your hands and you can chew on the seeds. You can chew on the grains of wheat or rye or barley. You can do that. That's legal. But on the Sabbath, well, you weren't supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. So the Jews came to him and said, your disciples are doing what is sinful. Jesus said, no. Don't you remember that the necessity of life, feeding, is of more importance than the letter of the law? What? He said, don't you remember what David did when he was fleeing from Saul? And he went to the temple and he asked the priest for the showbread because there wasn't any bread there to have, that he could share it with his followers and himself. And God did not hold him guilty for that because it was Well, it was a necessity. It was mercy. David probably would have lived till the next day. But God said there are times when the law tells you something in words, and it has something behind those words that you need to learn. It's necessity. You feed your children. You take care of the animals. You take care of the house. If the house catches fire, you put out the fire. You don't say, oh, the house is burning. I can't do anything because it can't work to put out the fire until tomorrow. Necessity. It's saving life, even if the emergency is not immediately life-threatening. Rescuing that sheep from the pit. Caring for the creation and the things in the creation just as God does. The second one in the Catechism was piety. That was a command for a day of worship, a day set apart from one's normal work. But Jesus says to them, don't you remember what happens on the Sabbath in the temple? Don't the priests have to offer sacrifices? Isn't that work? But they're not guilty. How come? If you want, what I'm doing right now, according to Jewish law, understood that way, is sin. I'm not supposed to be teaching. That's work. We could do this another day. Or at least somebody else could do it. Maybe I could videotape it and we could all sit there and listen to it. But that's not sin. Because it's an act of calling on God, it's an act of worshiping God, which is what that day was for. It was a day to set apart ourselves and say, really, everything I do is to worship God. Everything I do is to serve Him. Okay? So, Bible instruction teachers, Sunday school teachers, preachers, parents, when they do those things, calling us to pay attention to God and to worship Him is not sin. But the law said, and we see the letter said, the spirit of the law said something deeper. And so analyzing the commandments is appropriate. If I went to Mark chapter 2 and verse 23. And who knows where my note went. Now it happened that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and as they went, the disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Jesus said, have you never read what David did? We mentioned this. Do you not understand? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made to be an example to men about what it means to live your life as if God was most important 24/7, not just 24/1. And the Sabbath, Sunday, in our day, was intended to be a demonstration to you and to all of us of exactly what our lives were supposed to be always. There was necessity we had to do. We had to go work. We had to do this. We had to do that. But the necessity was that God was the center of all of that. All of life. As a matter of fact, so when it comes now to something that is needed or something that is merciful, Hosea chapter 6. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offering. The prophet is speaking to Israel, telling Israel what the problem is with the way they're keeping the law. So what I'd like to do is go to my third point. What does it mean to use the law properly? Using the Sabbath properly is the example Jesus chose, Jesus planned, Jesus worked out. In chapter 7, verse 24, Jesus says, to them. Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. The Jews want to kill Jesus because he's challenging the most visible of the commandments. In our terms, are you in church publicly and visibly? Are you at rest all day? So that people look and say, oh yes, you're keeping the Sabbath day. You're sitting there watching football? You're sitting there taking a nap. Well, a nap may be necessary if you work that hard. But are you reading something that doesn't take you to God? You're entertaining yourself? You're playing video games or something? What are you doing? The Jews want to kill Jesus because he's challenging the most visible of the commandments. They keep it superficially. But keeping it superficially is not keeping it like God does. God doesn't stop the sun or the rain day and night, or his mercy or his justice, just because it's the Sabbath. Normal behavior is tempered by necessity, piety, and mercy, as God's actions are. Needs and worship and alleviation of pain and distress are what God is saying is the nature of the law, and the examples are the letters. What's behind the examples are how you deal with the issues. So if I may, God set apart a day from the usual activities in order to dedicate the time to emulating God's actions. Some necessities can't be ignored. You got to feed the family. We got to eat. We care for animals. We tend to injuries and accidents. Okay? We do those things, and we should. They're necessities. But a day for piety? What do you do on Sunday? You get up, take a shower, come to church, talk to the people around church. We have a fellowship supper. You stay for the fellowship supper. You go home. In some cases lately, some of you come over to my house and we study again the Word in confirmation class, and then we have dinner together. What do you do? What do you do in the meantime? I guess I could ask, since I'm upstairs with the confirmation kids, what are the parents doing downstairs? I don't know. Is it the same kind of thing that the children and I are doing upstairs? Are you memorizing Scripture? Are you considering the things God has done, focusing on Jesus Christ? Are you dealing with Bible stories with your children? Taking them and saying, here's what the Bible says. Taking them through it. I don't know about you, but our children, they didn't get tired of the stories, although they preferred sometimes stories that weren't biblical. They didn't get tired of the stories because the stories were only partly important to them. It was your attention that was important. That you were saying to them they were more important to you than your peace, than your rest. Do you spend more time in prayer and praise? I suppose I could ask the question, which is more fun? Playing video games or praying? Which is something you want to do more? What does that say about you? I know what it says about me. How about spending time talking with others about God's Word? Spending time talking with others about what God has said and what God has done. And the things he's done in your life, and testifying to his grace. Maybe privately instructing some. Talking about the way God has dealt with your life. Is that what you do? You talk with your neighbors about that? How about if you help others? Helping others, whether it's helping others with children. Somebody's exhausted from chasing children around the house, or because of other factors in the family. So what do you do on Sunday? It's my day of rest. Does my day of rest give way to helping somebody else who needs more rest than I do? How about managing with children or housework, or helping them with pain, or maybe physical therapy, or maybe just making visits between them and their families and friends possible? Somebody's too old and too weak and they can't get to visit their family. Is it worth it to you to say, I'll take my car and I'll pick you up and we'll go over and visit your family, and I'll sit there and be a little bit bored while you're visiting with your family? Is that more important to you than whether you're bored or not? If it isn't more important, you don't understand the commandment. Being different from the world in what you don't do and in what you do do. You see, these are the proper use of the law. They are all pleasing and honoring God beyond our usual occupations, all of those examples. And there are many more that I could have gone, but I'm too long-winded anyway. Some contain our usual occupations, but all are directed to His honor and the strengthening of His people, and not focused on ourselves. The bottom line for keeping the Sabbath commandment is it ain't about you. It's about God. And if the day isn't all about God to you, and you don't understand the Sabbath, and you don't understand what your life is, and I include myself. Remember how we say it about if I point a finger at you, there's at least 3 pointing back at me? So I'm not excusing myself. The proper use of the law is it's all about God, not about me. Bow with me in prayer. Father, as we come before you, we ask for your mercy. We ask that your Spirit would cause us to understand why the letters, that we would understand what you are teaching us about those letters. And we pray, Father, that your Spirit would work in us, that he would sanctify us, that he would teach us, that we would do what is pleasing to you, what is emulating you, treating the world and each other the way you treat them all. For Jesus' honor we ask this, and by his power. Amen.